Hi BookTube, it's Amy, and it's time for a Friday Reads. I did have a very good reading week. At least yesterday was a pretty good reading day. That's because I was at home in bed sick, and so I managed to read 2 Stephen King novels. The first one I read my way through was Stephen King's Finders Keepers, and I'm going to admit I started reading this in bed. And then when I was feeling better, I picked it up and I went over to the bar to have some dinner and a drink and finish reading it. And that is definitely what you should do when you've been ill. When you've been feeling nauseous all day and hardly eating, you should definitely go to the bar. It was Wednesday and that's my usual habit, and I felt better and I felt like it. But yeah, probably not a best idea in the world. But I did read yesterday Stephen King's Finders Keepers, which is one of the many books in Stephen King's loose series that all stem from his novel Mr. Mercedes. And so in this novel, the father of the protagonist is among the people who is injured in that opening scene of Mr. Mercedes. And we do have a main character from that book, a couple of them actually, a couple characters from that book, appearing about midway through this novel, which King also did with his novel The Outsiders. We have them coming in as this detective agency to help save the day, so to speak. And I love the novel up until we got to that point where that detective, I think his name is Bill Hodgins, he shows up. He's just not a very interesting character, and I don't know why King is obsessed with him to the point where he's brought him in I think 4 of his novels now. But our protagonist, Peter, was very interesting. He was a young boy. I think we meet him when he's first about 11 or 13 or 14 or something, and he goes out into his backyard and finds this mysterious metal trunk down by the creek where this tree has kind of uprooted. And he opens it up, finds $20,000 and a bunch of mysterious notebooks, which are worth quite a bit of money, we find out. And so he actually uses this money, sending it to his parents as an anonymous donor to help keep the family floating in these years after that 2008 financial crisis, when his father is injured and recovering, and his mother is underemployed, to keep them in their home, to keep his parents together basically. But when that money runs out, he wants to sell these notebooks, these written manuscripts that he knows are worth a whole lot of money. Now, of course, we have another character here who is a murderer who committed a crime and who is going to be pursuing this young boy, Peter, because he has a link to this money and to these hidden manuscripts. And so I loved that factor about the book, that there were these manuscripts, these notebooks, these unpublished works by a famous author. Because it's just fun to read about, because just imagine if suddenly we found a bunch of unpublished works of Sylvia Plath or of Ernest Hemingway or something along those lines, something that would be worth quite a bit of money, but would also be worth quite a lot in terms of their literary merit and their historical value. So I enjoyed this one. And then I read Rose Madder, which I didn't enjoy quite as much. I had about a third left and I read this morning, but it was one of those ones where Stephen King just starts getting a little bit weird. So it's about this woman, Rosie. She runs away from her abusive, psychotic husband, who is a cop, starts a new life somewhere, and then she walks into a painting. She buys this mysterious painting, ends up inside it, and somehow it ends up saving her life. But it was a much better novel, I think, a more interesting one, before we got this weird painting scene. So I didn't enjoy this one all that much. And I also ended up DNFing a book this week. I DNF'd Margaret Atwood's Bodily Harm. It is about this divorcee woman who is struggling with cancer, and she decides to go on a vacation, and she goes to this out-of-the-way nation. You get the sense that the British have recently left and that politics are very volatile, but I was about halfway through, and so far nothing had happened other than that she had had kind of a miserable time at this hotel, and she had picked up a mysterious package for this older woman, and it's quite likely that it was drugs or contraband of some sort. But so far I was just bored, and so I stopped reading and I picked up those Stephen King novels. I also ended up reading a novel that I had showed in another video a week or so ago, and this is a Harlequin romance, Beggars May Sing, by Sarah Seeley. And it is about this young woman who is in the care of her stepmother. Her brother Sebastian lives with them, and her stepmother's brother has also taken on sort of a guardianship role. She is 19 and she falls in love with Mark Proctor. And there's kind of an odd scene. Well, Sarah Seeley solves the problem of the kind of gold digger brother who only wants her to marry Mark for the money by essentially having him fall off a cliff in the closing pages of the novel. And Gina, the main character, she seems kind of okay with this, which is odd. But yeah, that was an interesting surprise at the end of this romance novel. So what am I planning to read this weekend? This weekend I'm hoping to read Stephen King's Dreamcatcher, which I believe is tied to the world we're introduced to in it. We have the town of Derry. So the back of this book says, once upon a time in the haunted city of Derry, 4 boys stood together and did a brave thing. It was something that changed them in ways they could never begin to understand. 25 years after saving a Down syndrome kid from bullies, Bev, Henry, Pete, and Jonesy, now men with separate lives and separate problems, reunite in the woods of Maine for their annual hunting trip. But when a stranger stumbles into their camp disoriented and mumbling something about lights in the sky, chaos erupts. Soon the 4 friends are plunged into a horrifying struggle with a creature from another world, where their only chance of survival is locked in their shared past and in the Dreamcatcher. Yeah, so that sounds like a fun read. It could be completely insane and horrible, or it could be good. It could be like It, or like Salem's Lot, or Needful Things, which are some of my favorites. Or it could be more like that Rosie book I just read. What was that one called? It was so bad I don't remember. Rose Matter. It could be like Rose Matter. And then I'm also hoping to get into Air Force Girl by Renee Shaw this weekend. And this is a fun romance novel from the 1940s that I bought for the cover. And I believe I showed this one in a haul a couple weeks ago. So those are my weekend reading plans. I hope you enjoy your weekend reading as well.